So welcome, everybody, to Modern Tooling, Testing, and Automation. We're going to talk a little bit about Lighthouse, Puppeteer, and Headless Chrome. So we only have 30 minutes, a lot to cover in that amount of time, so let's go ahead and get started. So my name is Eric Bidelman. I am an engineer on the Chrome team. I work with web developers all over the world and help you guys build amazing web experiences. Fun fact about me is I'm actually from a state in the US called Michigan. And I can literally point to my hand, because it looks like a hand, and tell people where I'm from, which is really convenient. The other cool thing about Michigan is that it has the most number of lighthouses of any state in the United States. So it was only fitting that I worked on a project called Lighthouse eventually.
Yeah, and hi everyone. My name is Vinamrata Singal. I'm a product manager on the Chrome web platform team working on Lighthouse. And as a fun fact about myself, I actually really loved Bollywood dancing as a kid. And these are some embarrassing photos of me performing at family functions. And what I've recently realized is Bollywood dancing is actually pretty similar to my day job as a product manager. Specifically, when I'm doing Bollywood dancing, I'm trying to tell a story through physical movements about what I'm feeling in the music. And with product management, I'm telling a story to my users about my products. And so today, I'd like to tell you, take you on a little journey into the Lighthouse product itself. More on the PM style and less on the Bollywood dancing style, although I'm sure that would be pretty great too. Specifically, I wanted to focus on, with Lighthouse, talk a little bit about the problem that we're trying to solve, deep dive into the product itself, and then kind of take a step back and talk about Lighthouse in the broader context of web development. And then Eric will take over and talk about Headless, Chrome, and Puppeteer. So let's get started. So as a web developer, you might have heard about a lot of things that you're supposed to do. For example, you might have heard not to use methods like document.write, that you're supposed to optimize your images by compressing them to create performant web experiences, that you're supposed to be on HTTPS to deliver a secure experience to your end users, that accessibility is really important and you should have ARIA labels for all the elements on your page, and that you shouldn't use render blocking scripts, and so much more stuff. To add to this, you might have heard about a thing called progressive web apps throughout this conference that help you create really great mobile web experiences that feel like native app experiences. But in order to build a progressive web app, there's a lot of things you need to do, including serving your site over HTTPS, creating responsive pages on mobile and tablet, et cetera, et cetera. So you probably feel like this person, really confused, like, what am I supposed to be doing? And all you really want to be doing is spending time pushing code and creating features for your end users, being more like the person to the right, I guess. And that is a problem that we completely understand on Lighthouse, because we want to enable all of you in the audience out there to create really awesome mobile web experiences. So that's why we built Lighthouse, which is basically a product that helps you understand your website against 4 different categories of performance, accessibility, progressive web apps, and developer best practices, and running checks against them to create a personalized report that helps you understand what are the things that you're doing well on your website, and what are the things that you could perhaps do a little bit better. So this is a little bit hard to understand on the abstract level, so let's go into a live demo. So if you could switch to the demo, please. Awesome. So I'm going to run Lighthouse right now live in front of all of you. And I'm going to run it on possibly the best website you can imagine, which is airhorner.com. For those of you who have never seen this before, it's pretty simple. You just click this button, and it gives you the sound of an air horner, so pretty awesome. So I'm going to now run Lighthouse through the Chrome developer tools, but I will also talk about other ways in which you can run Lighthouse later. So I'm just going to open up the Chrome developer tools here, and then I'm going to go into the audits panel, and voila, I have Lighthouse right there. And so I'm going to click on Performant Audit, and I can check whatever categories of audits I'm interested in. So I care about everything, so I'm just going to run it across everything. And so now, what Lighthouse is actually doing is that it's emulating my website on a mobile device, specifically a Nexus 5X device, and it's actually throttling the network, so it's simulating a 3G connection. And that's why it kind of takes a little bit of time. But now you can see right here, I have my Lighthouse report, and things look pretty good on my website. So that's pretty awesome. So as I was mentioning earlier, there's quite a few ways that you can run Lighthouse. So the way that I just showed you was through the Chrome developer tools, but you can also run it through the Lighthouse Chrome extension. You can run it through the command line with the Lighthouse NPM module, and you can also run Lighthouse on web page test. So now let's do a little bit of deep dive into the Lighthouse report that I was showing you earlier. And for the purposes of this part of the talk, I will only be focusing on the performance and PWA section. So let's get started with the PWA section. So this was a slide earlier talking to you about what are all the different requirements that you need to implement in order to build a progressive web app. And we have a handy-dandy checklist that you can look at in order to understand what are the things you need to do to build a PWA. And what Lighthouse does is that it takes this baseline checklist and it basically automates the entire process. So you don't have to think about, am I actually implementing a service worker correctly? Lighthouse can tell and do that for you. And it tells you a score at the top that helps you understand at a high level how far are you in the journey in building your own progressive web app. And for Lighthouse definition, we consider a score of a 100, meaning that you've built a progressive web app. So now, talking about the performance section of the report. Before we deep dive into the report itself, I want to explain to you how we think about the page load. And so on the Chrome team, you might have heard us talk about a thing called progressive web metrics. And the idea behind that is the way that you understand a page load is through how an end user perceives the page loading. And there's a couple of key moments here in that user journey. The first one being first contentful paint. So when are the first pixels of content appearing on the screen? So this could be something like a text, an image, or an SVG. The next thing is first meaningful paint. So first meaningful paint is when did the first meaningful content on my page start appearing? So this could be like a hero image, for example. And then finally, at the very end, you have time to interactive. So when does my page become first interactive to users as well as continuously interactive so that users can click on anything and they're able to see the page be responsive? And so what Lighthouse does is it basically takes all these metrics, shows them to you for your web page, helps you understand at a high level how good these metrics are, and then also tells you what are ways that you can improve these metrics with the performance section of a report. So this looks kind of daunting, so I'll just go through it step by step with you. So at the very top, you have a high-level score. In this case, it's 63, that tells you this is overall how the performance of your website is. The next section is what we call metrics. So basically, at the top, you'll see a bunch of different images, what we call a film strip, which is basically how did your page look at different time intervals of, of your website loading. And then it also gives you values for the metrics that I was talking about, like first meaningful paint and time to interactive. The key thing to know here is that this section basically determines your Lighthouse score, meaning that metrics like first meaningful paint, first interactive, and consistently interactive are worth 5 times as much in terms of determining your final Lighthouse score. And so when you're thinking about what metrics should I be paying attention to and how do I think about improving my Lighthouse score, those are the top 3 metrics that you should be looking at. So the next section of the report is the opportunity section, with the idea being how are ways that you can improve your website. So in this case, you can see that optimizing your images is probably your best bet in terms of improving the performance of your website. And then finally, we have diagnostics. So if you're interested in deep diving into performance further, you can look into things like critical request chains. So I would like to give all of you a sneak peek into what's coming up next for Lighthouse. So I'm excited to announce that in the next few releases of Lighthouse, we'll be adding a whole new section of the report itself focused on search engine optimizations, specifically about how you can make your website more friendly to search engine crawlers and indexers. But it's coming soon, so it's not out yet. So now I want to take a step back and talk about Lighthouse in the broader context of web development. Specifically, I want to start off by talking about our adoption metrics. So Lighthouse has pretty good adoption in the sense of we have over 100,000 users using the Lighthouse extension. We have over 250,000 users using the Lighthouse NPM module. And in terms of DevTools, while I can't share exact stats, what I can say is that it's about half as popular as the timeline panel. We've also seen people building services on top of Lighthouse, specifically services like Calibre and Trio. I also want to talk about our open source community because we are an open source project and we definitely wouldn't be here without open source contributions we receive from developers like you. Even something as simple as changing the README file really helps our project go a long way. And we have over 100+ contributors from all over the world. You can see them in blue on this map here, from countries like India and Brazil and Poland and even the United States next door neighbor, Canada. So if you're interested in being part of this contributor community, and we'd love to have you join, check us out on GitHub. The repo is called Lighthouse. And then finally, I want to thank you I want to thank everyone for being here on behalf of the team. I really appreciate you coming out and listening to me talk about Lighthouse. And if you're interested in trying out Lighthouse, we actually have a booth at the Sandbox, so you can come talk to Eric and I about Lighthouse after the talk if you want to learn more. And so now that you have a website and you have a nice little way to audit it via Lighthouse, you might want to think about, what is the best way that I can detect regressions and automate some testing to make sure that the regressions don't actually end up going to my end users. And this is where Eric will tell you all about Puppeteer and Headless Chrome to see how you can make that happen. So thanks very much.
Thank you, thank you. So let's get started. Vi talked a little bit about manual testing using Lighthouse, which is in the DevTools now. But maybe you want to do some testing and automation using Headless Chrome or Puppeteer, and we're going to talk about both these right now. All right, so what is headless browsing? How many people have heard of Headless Chrome? Nice. So normally when you click the icon on your desktop, right, you launch Chrome, there's this nice window, there's a page you can interact with, there's a URL bar, there's the DevTools that you can open and poke around in. But with headless browsing, there's actually none of that. So there's no UI whatsoever, right? There's no URL bar. There's no address bar to interact with. Quite literally, there's no Chrome to Chrome. And so using Headless Chrome, you actually decide the future of what's going on. You control it using the scripts that you write. To launch Chrome in headless mode, you simply provide one flag on the command line. It's -- headless. And this will launch Chrome in a headless mode, and you're not going to see a window. So what do you actually do with it? Well, the important thing is to add this other flag. It's called the remote debugging port flag. This is where the magic happens. So what this does is it'll launch Headless Chrome, but it also enables the remote debugging protocol, the same API and protocol used by the DevTools itself when you're inspecting Node or in VS Code when you're inspecting your applications. Same stuff we can tap into using this command line flag. And so by doing this, we can then write an application in Node.js or what have you to actually control and automate Headless Chrome. So if you want to know more about Headless Chrome, I'm not going to really talk about it too much today, but there's a lot of cool stuff you can do from the command line. You can launch Headless Chrome, you can take screenshots, you can generate PDFs. Check out this article on developers.google.com. There's some interesting things you can do, but the more interesting things are actually when you write programs that control Headless Chrome. So one way you can use Headless Chrome programmatically is to use this amazing little module. It's called Chrome Launcher. The Lighthouse team put this together because actually launching Headless Chrome and dealing with Chrome on different platforms and different systems, finding Chrome, launching the right version is actually kind of complex. So we just basically abstracted that, created a little NPM module for you guys to use. It's really easy to launch Chrome just with this module. You can pass it that remote debugging port flag. In this case, I'm also saying launch in headless mode, and boom, in like one line of code, you can interact with Chrome in your Node.js program. Now, this is kind of where Puppeteer comes in the mix. So Puppeteer is a library for working with Headless Chrome. There's a lot of automation and testing framework libraries out there. You might have heard of Phantom and Selenium. We're not trying to invent the wheel and make a new one. We're just trying to make sort of an easy-to-use, out-of-the-box experience for Headless Chrome. We think it's really important for testing and automation, and we want that to be easy, especially in the case of Chrome. So the Chrome team said, hey, let's build a library. Let's build a Node.js library. We'll make it a modern library. We'll take advantage of some of these newer ES6 features. We're using promises all over the place. You'll see that in the code examples I showed today. The other reason for that is that it's just the way the architecture of Chrome works. So we're writing a Node program. We're sending asynchronous messages to this remote API, which in turn automates and does things with Chrome. And so all that message passing is asynchronous. So promises actually lend themselves very nicely to that. And of course, async and await, that cleans promises up quite a bit, makes our code a lot cleaner. But don't worry, you can use Node 6 if you want. You don't have to transpile. You can use Puppeteer in older versions of Node. No problem there. Now, the other thing we want to do is we wanted to bundle Chrome with the library. So one of the hard things to do is actually install Chrome on different platforms, make sure all the dependencies are installed. So when you get Puppeteer from NPM, we actually just download a local version of Chromium, which is the open source version of Chrome. And so you don't have to worry about configuration or anything like that. It just works. You focus on your code. You don't have to worry about actually launching Chrome. We want it to be a reference implementation for the DevTools protocol. Now, the protocol itself, there's so much you can do. It's a really complex, very awesome API surface. But we wanted to actually create the highest level API possible. Really wrap the API, the protocol API, in the most useful things we could. And so we have API calls for probably the most common use cases that you would use. So where does Puppeteer fit in our overall testing narrative? Well, I present to you the pyramid of Puppeteer. So at the bottom, right, we have the browser. We have Headless Chrome. Headless Chrome. And so I just want to remind you, at the bottom of this layer, right, we have the browser. It's all your new ES6 features, your JavaScript features, your new web platform features. So the fact that we can use an automated testing library to test things like service worker and push notifications and some of these newer web platform features is actually really exciting. We haven't had that in the past with some of these other frameworks. On top of that, you have the Chrome Developer Remote API. Again, very, very complex, big API, but that's the thing that's going to interact with Chrome itself. Now, we're not going to interact with that directly. That's where Puppeteer comes in. So again, this small shim that sits on top of this lower level stuff, and at the very top is where your scripts come in. So these are the node scripts that you're going to write that interact with the Puppeteer API and then control Chrome. That's how everything fits together. So just to show you the difference between using the DevTools protocol by itself and using Puppeteer, two examples, the same thing. We'll basically navigate to a page and then print the HTML content of that page. And you don't really have to understand the details of the code on the left. Just know that it's much more robust, right? There's more stuff that's going on. I need two libraries to do things like launch Chrome and control the protocol. I have to do a lot of setup, a lot of cleanup. I have to enable things and disable things. In the right example with Puppeteer, it's really clear what's going on, right? You launch a browser, you create a new page, you navigate to example.com, and then you print the content of that page. So Puppeteer makes a lot of these things very easy to do in just a few lines of code. So what can you do? Well, the first thing a lot of people do is take screenshots of their page. You can do that with Puppeteer's APIs. So of course, the first thing you need to do, go grab Puppeteer off NPM. You can use yarn or NPM. Just install Puppeteer locally. Again, it's going to bring down a version of Chrome, and you can require it inside of your Node application. So first things first, if you want to write a script that uses Puppeteer, the first thing you probably want to do is launch Chrome. Puppeteer has a launch method, and by default, what that is going to do is launch a headless version of Chrome. And again, everything is a promise, so this is going to resolve and give us a browser instance to then interact with and control. So calling launch will give us a browser instance. The next thing we do is want to create a page using async and await just to clean up the promises a little bit. So we'll use browser.newPage to create that. We'll use page.goto to navigate to example.com. And what this is going to do is actually wait for the load event to fire, so make sure our page is loaded up and ready to go. And then finally, we're going to take a screenshot of the page itself. So Puppeteer has an API for that, page.screenshot. And it's kind of nice. It's got this path property that you can set. You don't have to read a stream or read a buffer or anything like that. You just give it the file name that you want to create, and boom, you have your screenshot on disk. So last but not least, you'll probably want to close the browser. We're done with it. We don't need to do any more scripting. So we'll close out Chrome. And all in all, that clocks in at like 5 lines of code to take a screenshot of your web app. Pretty cool. So what other cool things can you do with Puppeteer? Screenshots are one. A lot of people like to create PDFs of their sites. I don't know why. They like to literally print out their page, their entire site, and give that to someone to look at. Well, Headless Chrome has the ability to print to PDF, and you can do that using Puppeteer's APIs as well. So very similar to the Screenshot API, we can navigate to google.com, for instance, emulate a media device, a screen media instead of print media, so we don't get the print style sheet, and then call page.pdf and save the PDF to disk. Pretty simple. Another thing we can do is emulate a device. Maybe you want to test the responsiveness of your device or of your application. This example here uses some of the built-in predefined device descriptors we have. So you don't have to worry about knowing the viewport settings of different devices or the display pixels, ratios, or anything like that. Just require Puppeteer device descriptors. In this example here, I'm just emulating an iPhone 6 device and then navigating to google.com. And so this is the end result here. Obviously, it's just the mobile version of google.com. So it's super easy to emulate a device in Puppeteer. And again, DevTools can do all this, but Puppeteer is the programmatic way to do a lot of these things. One of the neater things you can actually do is inject code into the page, right? Maybe you want to test some functionality of your page or make sure some JavaScript is operating like you expect it to. So what we're going to do here is we're going to navigate to just my Twitter feed. We're going to find the first tweet on the page. We're going to programmatically click that element, which will bring up this overlay. That's what Twitter does when you click the first element. And then we're going to take a screenshot of that DOM element. So you can take a screenshot of a page, a full page, or a DOM element. The choice is yours. So we're going to run some code in the page. The first thing, of course, we're going to do is call launch. We're going to launch a new version, instance of Headless Chrome. We're going to create a new page to work with. We're going to navigate to my Twitter stream, just twitter.com/eBidel. Next, what we'll do is we'll actually use page.$eval. And what this does is kind of like jQuery. You give it a CSS selector, which will find that node on the page. And the cool thing that happens here is the callback for this is not run inside of Node. It's actually run inside of the page. So this gets injected inside the browser, very similar to typing this in the console. And so we'll click that using anchor click, which will open that overlay. The next function call is waiting for that selector to be available. So Puppeteer has a method that says, hey, make sure this element's visible before I move on. And so when this promise resolves, we're guaranteed to have this Twitter overlay pop up. And then finally, we'll take a screenshot of that DOM element. Come on. So we'll just grab that handle to that element and then take a screenshot. So all in all, it looks like something like this. We'll open the browser. We'll navigate to Twitter. I'll find the first tweet using Puppeteer. You can see it all very fast. It finds that element. And eventually, what you get is the final product, which is a screenshot. So this is my new puppy, Chewie. Everybody say hi to Chewie. He's super cute. He's a Wookiee, like Star Wars. But so we can take screenshots of full pages, we can take screenshots of DOM elements, and we can take screenshots of any portions of the page you want. So what you just saw is actually really, really powerful, right? In a couple lines of code, we just wrote some Puppeteer API code, and you can wrap that in your favorite testing framework, and all of a sudden you have an instant smoke test, right? Insert your favorite testing harness, no matter what you want to use, and you've got an instant integration smoke test. We're just testing the functionality of Twitter in this case. Very, very cool. And easy to do using Puppeteer. Now, another thing you can do that's very, very powerful is intercept requests before the browser ever issues those requests. And we can do that using the set request interception method. But in this case, what I'm doing is I'm waiting for the request event. Every time the browser tries to make a network request, we'll intercept that request and decide what to do with it. So this example here is going to navigate to youtube.com. And if the resource type, if the request is for an image, we'll actually just abort that request. We'll cancel it. The browser will never issue that. And if it's not, we'll just let that pass through as normal. So the end result, if you actually run this piece of code in Node, exactly what you'd expect. So the images start to 404. What this is really great for is you can test things like, does my layout of my site work if images don't load? Is my accessibility OK? Is my layout OK? You can imagine doing this for other resources like CSS. Maybe you want to intercept one style sheet and serve up another. You can totally do that using network request interception. So to kind of decide what to do based on the request type. A really common thing to do in automation is to do automation of form submission. Hey, does my form actually work? So Puppeteer has high-level APIs for this, for typing in form inputs and clicking things on the page. The classic example here is just go to google.com, right? So we'll navigate to google.com. We'll input the text Puppeteer into that search box just by selecting it using its CSS selector. And we'll call page.click and click the Google search button using page.click. Next, we'll use the same wait for selector method. Each of the google.com search results is an anchor tag wrapped in an H3. So we'll just wait for those results to be ready using that same method. And then finally, we'll just use $eval to iterate through all of those titles that come up and just print the titles to the console. So if you run this in Node, just in the console, you get exactly what you'd expect, just the list of search results for the word Puppeteer. So we've showed two things. We've showed interaction with the keyboard, form submission, and actually just scraping content from a website using Puppeteer's APIs. So something new to the DevTools is it actually has this new panel called Performance Monitor, which has a slew of awesome performance information inside of it. A lot of that stuff is actually being surfaced in Lighthouse now, and you can programmatically get access to that as well inside of Puppeteer. It's a simple API call. Puppeteer page.metrics will give you this information. It corresponds to the panel itself, so all the information like how long do your scripts take, how long does it take to recalc styles in this app. And more stuff is being added to this all the time by the DevTools team, so this is going to get much more rich as we go on. This is really great if you want to track performance over time of your application, maybe in a CI environment. Really useful stuff. And there's a ton of stuff you can do with Puppeteer. I can't cover everything today. I just want to point out a couple more things. If you use a service worker, a PWA, you want to test your site to work offline. You can test. You can turn actually JavaScript off, or you can test with the network connection off to see if your site does indeed work offline. Using Puppeteer, we can intercept network and console requests that anytime the browser or the site logs something to the console, we can intercept that and print that or do something with that information. And if we don't have a device descriptor for you, you can actually emulate any type of device you want using page set viewport, set of device pixel, or any dimensions you want. So before I leave you, a couple more pro tips that I've actually run into. I talked to a lot of developers getting started in Puppeteer. Just want to mention a few pro tips for debugging. I think they're really useful. So let's talk about this Puppeteer launch method again. Again, this just launches Headless Chrome, and you get a browser instance to interact with. A couple of interesting things, right? If you're writing a script and you can't see what's going on, it's not so useful. Maybe you're debugging the script. You have no idea what it's doing. Just throw on Headless False. You can actually just launch Chrome. You can see the window. You can see Puppeteer automate the script, the page, and navigate and click around. It's actually pretty cool to watch this. But that's actually really useful just for debugging, too. So I highly recommend throwing the headful mode of Chrome on. You can also auto-open the DevTools if you want, using this flag, DevTools equals true. That will launch a headful version of Chrome, but also just open the DevTools at the same time. Kind of useful. You can see DevTools poke around as Puppeteer is kind of automating your page. All right, debugging options. Another couple of interesting things you can do is you can set slow-mo. And slow-mo is a flag that allows you to slow down all operations that Puppeteer does by a certain number of milliseconds. So let's say somebody's typing in a website, right? They don't type as fast as a computer. So you can actually slow that operation down using this option, slow-mo, which will basically simulate a real user, which is useful to see what a real user would do on your site. It also slows things down like navigation, so you can see what's happening as Puppeteer is going through. Dump.io is useful if you want to see information from Chrome itself. So if your page is doing something weird, like the browser is actually crashing, turning this flag on is actually pretty useful to see that information. So last but not least, if you don't want to actually install anything today, you can totally just try out Puppeteer. I hacked together this little site over the weekend. It's called trypuppeteer.appspot.com. You can go there, you can just play around with Puppeteer's API, run all of our demos, tweak code, see the results at the top. You can see the console information and also any PDFs or screenshots you generate. Really easy just to get started and kind of tinker around, but no guarantees on uptime because it is just a hack project. Now, one thing you can kind of do that's cool with this is we can use Puppeteer locally on our machine to launch that site, and then which runs Headless Chrome and Puppeteer in the cloud. So we're using Puppeteer to control Puppeteer, which is kind of like this crazy Inception moment. So just to show that's possible, I actually built that little script. What we're going to do here is we're going to run Puppeteer on my machine. We're going to launch that site, try Puppeteer, inject some code. So you can see what I've done is injected code that opens that page itself, and then takes a screenshot of the final product. So hopefully we'll see a picture within a picture here. And note my mouse at the top is not going to move, so we're actually automating this using Node. We're not moving and clicking around the page. So Puppeteer will click that run button, we'll get a final product, and eventually what happens is you get a screenshot within a screenshot, which is kind of cool. So before I leave you, just a couple of things to mention. The first thing is make sure if you're using one of these testing frameworks out there, Phantom or Selenium, make sure they're using the headless version of the browser. A lot of browsers now have a proper headless mode, and some of these APIs and frameworks have been around for a while. They might not be using this mode. It'll save you memory, it'll save you time. It's a lot faster to test in headless mode. A lot of people use libraries like JSDOM, which is a great, awesome library for testing DOM and testing code that uses DOM. But the fact that we have a headless browser and we can actually test in a real DOM implementation using a real browser, maybe you don't need a library like JSDOM anymore. So consider that. And also, test in other browsers, not just Chrome, obviously. Firefox has a headless mode that they launched in Firefox 56, and other browsers also are implementing headless mode. So test across all browsers, not just Chrome. It's very important. So with that, we throw a lot of stuff your way. Here are all the open source project and resources that we talked about today. Lighthouse, which V covered, Puppeteer, the DevTools protocol, if you want to really know what the DevTools can do and that API can do, really, really awesome stuff. The article on Headless Chrome and the Chrome Launcher module. If you just want to work with Headless Chrome, check that out. So I think with that, we're all done. And we really appreciate you guys sticking around. We know it's late in the day. Thank you, everyone, on the live stream for attending. My name's Bidelman.
I'm Vinamrata Singal, and thank you for coming.
Woo.